Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating set of sources today, and they all seem to point to a critical look at how we even define progress in, well, in some very sensitive areas of scientific research.
That's right. We're going to get into the intersection of artificial intelligence and autism research.
And ask a pretty fundamental question, I think. How and why do certain technologies, specifically detection technologies, get so much funding while, the actual structural support for people, it just consistently lags behind?
Our main source for this is a really sharp commentary by Jaime Hoerricks, a PhD who's reviewing a very modern piece of research. It's a 2025 study that uses large language models, LLMs, for diagnosis.
Right, and if you just read the title of that study, it sounds like pure progress, using these powerful AI tools to better understand, language disorders associated with autism.
It does, but the title Hoerricks chose for their critique tells you everything you need to know.
Another mirror, polished.
Exactly. It suggests we're just looking at the same old thing, but with a shinier, more modern finish.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that, to look at this recurring historical pattern that Hoerricks identifies, where technical innovation, what they call technical validation, is sort of allowed to pose as genuine care.
Yeah, and we need to understand the forces, really the structural forces, that keep this cycle going.
Okay, let's start there. Let's break down the actual technology that's at the center of this critique. We're talking about that LLM study.
Right, so from a purely technical view, this is cutting-edge stuff. The LLM is trying to detect patterns in the language of autistic individuals.
Patterns that a human might miss.
Things that are just incredibly difficult to quantify at scale. These models are advanced pattern recognition engines, so they're looking for differences in syntax, variations in prosody.
Prosody, so the rhythm and intonation of speech.
Exactly, or specific repetitions. The idea is that the machine can filter all this complex, noisy data and produce a clear, quantifiable metric of difference.
And as the source points out, this is the kind of study that, it just clears peer review, it slides neatly into a high-impact journal. It's framed as undeniable progress.
Oh, of course. Because it's using AI to make something previously invisible, legible.
But this is where Hoerricks' critique really begins, because when they read this paper, the reaction wasn't excitement. It wasn't even really surprise.
No, it was described as a familiar sinking recognition. A feeling that, and I'm quoting here, lands in the body before it resolves into words.
That's so visceral. And it wasn't anger, it was fatigue. The source uses this phrase, the quiet grief of watching the same move succeed again.
It suggests this isn't about the LLM itself. It's not about the tech. It's about the predictable way that TUT is being used.
So what is it about this pattern of detection that's so draining for people who've been in this field for a while?
Well, it implies that no matter what tools we have, the research community always defaults to the same position, which is we have to identify and measure the difference before we even think about structural support.
So the fatigue comes from seeing billions of dollars poured into answering the same basic question over and over again. How can we find it faster?
Exactly. And this is where the historical view is so important. Hoerricks points out that the tools are always changing. The substrate changes, the vocabulary modernizes.
The diagrams get prettier.
Yeah, all of that. But the underlying frame, the core assumption, holds completely steady. It's an old pattern playing out on a new algorithmic stage.
So let's trace that arc for a second.
Okay, so before we had this kind of computational power, the drive for detection started with, say, behaviorism classifying and modifying observable actions.
Right.
Then that sort of gave way to a search for biological markers through genetics and neuroimaging.
And now we've arrived at AI.
Which is really just a new, more powerful statistical tool to continue that same search.
So the tool evolves, but the frame, as Hoerricks calls it, it stays rigid. What is that enduring, unchanging purpose?
The author defines it very clearly. And it's really crucial for you, the listener, to get this. Regardless of the tool, observational, genetic, AI autism is consistently defined as something to be detected, extracted, classified. And this is the most important part, something to be optimized against a norm that never has to justify itself.
A norm that never has to justify itself. Wow, let's unpack that. Why is optimizing against a norm, instead of just studying difference, such a key problem here?
Because the goal isn't just understanding, it's defining deviation. If you accept the norm as this unexamined default ruler, then all your research money gets channeled into measuring the distance from that ruler.
So the LLM accurately spotting a deviation is seen as progress because it reinforces that norm. It helps quantify it.
It reinforces the system that benefits from that clear classification.
Which brings us to this other key concept from the source, rendering autism legible for scale. That seems to be the real goal of this AI repackaged as care. What does that mean to make something legible for scale?
It means it can be quantified and managed by large-scale systems. Think school districts, insurance companies, national health services.
So it's about bureaucracy.
In a way, yes. It shifts the focus from, say, structural accommodation to individual diagnosis. If you can quickly categorize 1,000 people with an LLM metric, you can assign them to a pre-existing intervention track. The tech is valued because it helps institutions operationalize difference efficiently.
So the tech is driven less by the needs of autistic people and more by the administrative and economic needs of the institutions themselves.
That's the argument.
Which, of course, raises the biggest question of all. If people in the field know this, if they see this pattern, why does the funding keep pushing research in the same direction?
And that's the critical pivot in the source material. We move from talking about technology to talking about structural economics.
It's not malice, it's money.
Hoerricks is very clear about this. The driving force is economics, not necessarily malice. It's not that people are bad actors. It's that the entire infrastructure of research funding is set up to reward one specific kind of output.
Okay, so let's follow the money. This is the map we need to understand this system. Where does it flow and where does it get blocked?
The source is pretty stark on this. The money flows overwhelmingly to detection. Huge grants for AI algorithms, genetic mapping, technical validation tools, anything that promises a clear, predictizable output.
Things that can generate patents, high-impact papers.
Or be turned into a diagnostic app or a screening tool.
And the other side of that coin.
Well, that's where the need is. Structural supports, supported housing, workplace accommodations, resources for autistic adults. Those needs remain chronically underfunded.
So autistic lives remain underfunded, while detection methods get the budget.
Right. Detection is framed as a solvable scientific challenge. Structural support is seen as this ongoing, expensive social problem to be managed or minimized.
And to make this concrete, Hoerricks uses a really powerful personal story. This isn't just theory for them.
Not at all. As a PhD, they experienced this system's rigidity firsthand. They wrote this impactful dissertation that was focused on structural critique on systemic change, and they had to self-fund the entire thing.
Because the grant agencies rejected it.
They did. And the reasons they gave for the rejection, they perfectly illustrate what the system defines as valuable progress.
What were the labels they used?
The work was called too critical, too structural, and not translational enough.
Let's break down those last two. Not promising the right kind of deliverable or not easily productized. What does that actually mean?
It means it doesn't offer a clear return on investment, either for the university or for a commercial partner. The deliverable they want is a metric, an algorithm, a screening tool, something you can sell or publish.
And research that's too structural, like, say, analyzing why social programs fail or advocating for universal design, it doesn't have that neat productizable thing at the end of it.
No. It requires shifting power and resources. It doesn't invent a new tool. So it's deemed too broad, too difficult, too structural.
And that creates this self-reinforcing loop. Researchers are smart. They learn what kind of proposals get funded.
And so they propose projects that emphasize technical detection. And the frame holds. The money predetermines the shape of the science.
So bringing it all together, what's the synthesis here? This deep dive wasn't really about one AI paper.
No, not at all. It's about recognizing this century-old economic pattern where the hunt for technical detection, what can be extracted from an individual, it systematically diverts resources from structural care.
The key takeaway, then, is that scientific priorities are often just economic priorities in disguise.
Yes, and you need to be informed about that. When you see a new study about a diagnostic tool, you have to ask, what non-technical, structural need is being ignored in favor of this?
It's the difference between asking, how do we classify this population with 99% accuracy, versus asking, how do we make society work better for this whole population, regardless of their diagnosis?
And the funding system is only set up to answer that first question.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty critical thought to chew on.
It does. And it's this. If the focus stays on detecting and optimizing individuals against this fixed, unexamined norm, how much of our scientific effort and our budget is actually just spent enforcing that norm? and rewarding the systems that benefit from it,
instead of questioning it.
or supporting the diverse realities that exist outside of it. So what does it mean for you to be informed about the economic structures that are guiding all this research? I think that's the challenge that remains long after this one LLM paper is forgotten.
A truly structural critique to absorb. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.